Hello everybody, this is my new review of my end of term report of my BMW i3 Rex, which I owned for just over 4 years and covered 60,000 miles. This is my first ever BMW car and my first ever EV or electric vehicle. This March 2017 BMW i3 range extender or Rex superseded the 60 ampere hour model and was preceded by the 120 ampere hour model. This is the 94 ampere hour model, which equates to around 33 kilowatt hour battery, but only 27.3 kilowatt hours is actually usable. This battery size gives a overall range of around 114 to 120 miles. No one's entirely sure why BMW stuck with the ampere hour unit as the de facto standard in kilowatt hours. BMW made a special factory in Leipzig in Germany to produce the i3. It appeared as a concept car called the Mega City vehicle before then, and it was always designed to be a short haul urban commuter type of car. As you can see in this part of the video, it has very narrow tyres. I affectionately call them bicycle tyres. They are offset, with the front tyres being slightly narrower than the rear tyres. The i3 is rear wheel drive and has a motor placed in the rear, so most of the weight is rear biased. And because this is the range extender model, it also has a very small 2-cylinder scooter engine, which is also placed at the rear of the car, which gives you an extra 80 to 100 miles of range if needed, and as a kind of backup and fail-safe, simply because the public charging infrastructure has never been that good. The fuel tank for the range extender is just above the front wing and takes just 9 litres of fuel, so it literally fills within a few seconds when you're at the petrol pump. And because you have that there is never any range anxiety driving this car, because even if you know you're low on charge or about to run out of battery power, you always have the backup of the petrol tank. This very well specified model was purchased in March 2017 and had a recommended retail price of £42,000, but with the government grant and other BMW type discounts, it cost me just under £35,000. I do a lot of mileage every year, around 15,000 miles, so I wanted to have it just exactly what I wanted on the car. The amount of options ticked is fairly typical for a German manufacturer, it must be said. Now we're just going to take a quick look around the car, starting with the boot. This is a fairly compact sized boot, but has a nice rectangular shape. Excuse the camera here because it was very bright outside and very dark inside the boot. But it's a very practical shape, and you're about to see now you can easily fold the seats down using 2 pull cords on either side. And again, this is a surprisingly large storage area for carrying fairly big items and also long items, so the IKEA shop is not going to be a problem. I'm just removing the parcel shelf here, and you can see once that is removed that you almost have a van-like shape. So the capacity with the seats up is around 260 litres, and with the seats down is around 1100 litres. And as we come round to the rear 3/4 view, we're seeing the most divisive part of the i3, and that is the rear opening or so-called suicide doors. There are definitely pros and cons to these doors. If you have a driveway or space to open the car on either side, they are absolutely fantastic. They give you loads of space to load up passengers or objects to carry. But if you're in a parking space and somebody parks next to you, you can't really open the rear doors, as the front doors have to be opened first, and therefore it's a very, very tight squeeze. Here you can see one of the optional extras, which is the loft interior, which is a light interior. This was a bit of a risk, but as you can see here, after 4 years and 60,000 miles, this interior still looks brand new, and it has not been professionally valeted at all. And these are the inside of the rear doors, where you can see the speakers, and with the privacy glass. And it's worth knowing that the rear doors in the i3, the windows do not open. And just to have a look at the rear section again, and just the width of the seats, which are extremely comfortable. The rear seats have a 50-50 split, and this is a strict 2+2 seater car. In some markets they did offer a 3-seater rear bench, but in the UK and Europe and most other countries it was just a 2-seater in the rear. Isofix child points on both seats, and for me, the headrests I would tend to keep flattened, so it just improved my rear view. But obviously those headrests do sit up normally. It's worth knowing that the i3 is just 4 metres long, so it's still classed as a city car, but as you can see there's plenty of rear seat legroom for such a compact car. You will see plenty of speakers dotted around the interior of the i3, as I went for the Harman Kardon speaker upgrade. This had 12 speakers providing 360 watts of power, and it even had a central speaker on the front dashboard, so it really did give you surround sound. And now for a view of the interior. I've owned and been in many cars over the years, but I still believe the interior of the i3 is one of the best interiors ever designed. Even compared to other BMWs in the range, which are far more expensive, they all feel really quite staid and boring in relation to the i3. And with the optional extra of the sunroof, this is one of the lightest and airiest cabins I think you can ever experience in any car. There is a lot of glass all over the car, and the visibility out is fantastic. Right, now let's get a driver's point of view. And as soon as you step inside the i3, you really do realise what a modern and futuristic cabin it has. And that's one of the main things, is that all the ignition and throttle areas up by the steering wheel, which is now being copied by other EVs. And that's the main central display, which is not fading, that's just part of the camera shutter speed causing that fading out. But it's nice and clear. And then you can see yet another optional extra, which is the upgraded professional media sat-nav centre with an enlarged screen. And praise be, plenty of physical buttons to control ventilation and other things. Pay special attention to the 8 buttons along the top there, which you can program for various things, such as a particular sat-nav destination, radio station and other things, so it's very customizable. And there you see the ventilation and the ventilation knob. You can just twist that large rubber knob to increase or decrease the temperature. And in this particular model, the Rex, button number 8 activates the petrol engine. There are conditions associated with activation of the Rex, namely that the battery has to be under 75% full, but it becomes very easy to use over time. It has thermonuclear seat heating, which my wife absolutely loved, although I very rarely used seat heaters. And then you can see again the glove box underneath the, again, optional extra mahogany finish, but a nice large glove box. Huge door bins to carry various shopping bags and bottles, and again a lovely fit and finish all around the cabin. And then in the centre, because this is an EV, well, that's just a central cup holder that you can move around or take out completely. You can see the flat floor, so you can move if you want from passenger to driver seats if needed. And now the very famous and much copied BMW iDrive system, which controls all the major parts of the car. One of the commonly used buttons that will get used to pressing when you get into the car is the drive mode selector, and it's very important to try and put it into Eco Pro mode, and by doing so you get the best range. As you can see there, it jumped up from around the 100 mark to 145. Eco Pro mode is a very efficient mode, but I never used it. But the comfort mode is the default, but always advisable to put it into Eco Pro mode. Again, more storage area between the seats and the central armrest. And just having a look at the door panels now, one touch window controls for driver and passenger, just for the front windows of course, because the rears don't open, and just central locking, although the car does lock automatically when you pull away. and just a view down by the steering wheel to the headlights and fog light control, although you tend to leave it in the auto setting. And for me, and all my cars I think I've ever owned, always like either a glass roof or ideally an opening sunroof. And although this is bisected, it's still lovely to get plenty of air when possible. But now let's have a look at the frunk, or in Britain we can call it a fruit for a front boot. Display just telling you that the bonnet's now open. And to be honest, a frunk in an EV should be completely mandatory, simply because EVs do not have engines, so therefore there should be plenty of extra storage space under the bonnet of the i3. It's a fairly smallish area, but it's big enough and important enough to hold the charging cable, and this is not waterproof, this area, and it has little sinkholes in the bottom to allow water to drain out. But when you have a sopping wet cable, you do not want to put it in the boot, so that's ideal to put it under the front bonnet. And there's some just tyre compression system and the spare tyre and warning triangle also under there. And just taking another look at opening the i3 up, those rear doors, as long as you have the space, come in very handy. If you move the seats forward, you can put in things like potted plants very easily. And just looking at the heft and width of the front doors, the way they're constructed, because they form an important part of the safety structure, but just the premium materials and the different type of materials throughout, pretty unique. And probably one of the biggest selling points about the i3, which is not talked about much, is the carbon fibre reinforced plastic passenger cell, which gives the car extreme strength but makes the car very light. The i3 just weighs around 1.35 tons, which is incredible for an EV. And this is just showing that the front seats do have a little handle there to make access to the rear easier for rear passengers. But all in all, with the frameless front doors, it's a hugely modern car. And now just showing you another optional extra that I paid for, which is the comfort access. So you can either keep your finger on this comfort button here when the car is fully open, and it will fully close everything. I think this is a fairly common feature on various high-end, especially German cars. But you can do the same thing by pressing the lock button on the fob as well. And this is just showing what it's like to get into the back of the i3, something that I'm not used to doing myself too often. You close the door, you can see the seat belt makes up part of the rear door, but there's plenty of space here in the rear for such a compact car. Like I said, just 4 meters long. Be enough of the waffling. This is just unplugging the charge cable, so this charges at home at up to 7.4 kilowatts, and it's about time we go for a little drive. It's worth knowing that the i3 has a 170 brake horsepower motor, and that gives around 250 nanometers of torque, or 184 pounds-feet of torque, giving a 0 to 60 in around 7.8 seconds. But in the real world, it feels a lot faster than 7.8 seconds, and you'll often leave things for dead away from the lights. Anyway, let's move over to some GoPro footage to get a driver's point of view on what it's like driving the i3. First thing to do is always put on your seatbelt, because if you then turn the car on, you get that awful dong noise. Press the start-stop button, you get a chime, simply because there's no engine noise. Push that hand control throttle away from you for drive, and if you want to go into reverse, pull back, so it's quite easy to remember what to do each time. And now I'm just going to show you really how quiet this car is. This is a downhill section of road, and in the i3, which has phenomenal regenerative braking, which means it really is a truly one-pedal car. So as you come off the accelerator, the car will brake, and it will brake to a standstill if needed, especially on the flat. But manoeuvring the car, the turning circle is phenomenal, simply because you do not have an engine between the front wheels. So if you do need to do a U-turn or 3-point turn in any street, it's done with ease. The turning circle is just 9.9 meters. The i3 has a reputation for having a slightly choppy ride, but I'm used to quite sporty cars, and I thought the ride was fantastic. Yes, I think on very bumpy or poorly tarmacked roads the ride can be a little bit jittery, but overall, like most EVs, it's an incredibly smooth car to drive. And I think you'll notice here, I think you can hear my breathing more than any other noises. This is why I love having a sunroof, because when you open the sunroof it just gives a bit of breeze into the car, as opposed to opening or dropping a window. Because the window's by your ear, you tend to get a bit of buffeting and loud noise, which can be deafening. That's why I prefer having a sunroof instead of an open window. And in an EV, it's always better to do things naturally by using outside ventilation than using the heaters, because using the heater and the ventilation system or the air conditioning uses up a lot of battery power. So that's why I always prefer having a sunroof that can open. So I'm just closing the roof again, and you can see again how quiet it is. This shows the pickup. So again, when you put the hammer down, this thing really takes off. I just had to slow down there because of the speed restriction. But it never gets old, and after 60,000 miles and 4 years, the acceleration of the i3 never gets old. And that is helped so much by the lightness of the chassis, and that is greatly helped by the carbon fibre reinforced plastic construction. And a light car has so many benefits, so it helps efficiency. Over the 4 years and 60,000 miles, this i3 averaged around 4.5 miles per kilowatt hour, which is fantastic really. That's a very efficient car. So it's not just all about how big the battery is, but also about how efficient an EV can use that battery, or whatever battery it has. But we're going uphill here. It's a very steep, well, it is classed as a mountain, this. And in an EV, and especially in the i3, there doesn't seem to be any incline because it just accelerates so smoothly and without any issue at all. I think that's one of the other great selling points of an EV, in that it doesn't have a gearbox. So when you push the accelerator, there's no, in comparison to an automatic car, there's no need to wait for cogs to change or for the electronics to change down a gear, as it were. You're always in the right gear in an electric car, and therefore there's always instant throttle response, which for someone like me who's always driven sports cars is a major boon and plus point. Because the i3 has such front narrow tyres, you get surprisingly good feel through the steering wheel, and steering feel is one of those things that have been disappearing from cars greatly over the past few years. But generally speaking, the thinner the tyres are, the better the steering feel is, such as cars in comparison to the Lotus Elise, for example. But because of marketing and because of the weights of cars, tyres are getting bigger and bigger, and therefore you're losing the steering feel. And also, the thinner the tyres are, the more efficient the car is. There's less road noise and less drag, for example. So that just helps efficiency as well. So everything kind of goes round and round in a, not a vicious circle, but the opposite of a vicious circle, a beneficial circle. It's worth knowing that the batteries in the i3 are liquid cooled and manufactured by Samsung SDI. It's important to know that EV batteries like to stay around, say, 16 to 25 degrees centigrade. That's when they work optimally. Any colder than that, and efficiency and range will drop quite dramatically, and any hotter than that, then efficiency drops in general. During my ownership, best range I've ever achieved is 154 miles, and that was in the height of summer. And during the winter, you can see mileage range dropped to around 80 to 90 miles. So the overall real world range is around 110 to 130 miles, I would say, quite comfortably. And that is pretty impressive for what is an effective 27.2 or so kilowatt hour battery. And I must emphasise that that is the EV battery range. With this particular model, which is the range extender, I have an extra 80 to 100 miles of range in addition to that, and I got the Rex simply because I do a very frequent journey from South Wales to London, which is a 185-mile journey, and the Rex allows me to do that journey non-stop in all weathers, so in the height of summer but also the depths of winter, and that's why I've been so happy with the i3 Rex. So just another example here of the acceleration from standstill. You get a nice little Jetsons type whine from the rear mounted motor when you accelerate. The overall cost of running this car works out at about £400 for every 10,000 miles covered. That compares to around £1,100 to £1,200 for a small economical city petrol runabout, so the savings are quite large. And what about reliability? Overall, there are just two things that have affected the i3. One of them is the Rex failing to depressurise and not being able to refuel. There's another interesting slight design quirk with this car is that the front mounted camera can sometimes have condensation build up within the unit after everything else is defrosted, so the camera doesn't work, so therefore it won't read speed warning signs or the cruise control may not work. The app has been overall quite brilliant that comes with the car, and this is quite a common finding, is the drivetrain check soon message. That can come up with for various reasons, but the earliest problem I had was replacement of the aircon compressor, which I wasn't happy about, but it was done and I didn't have any issues since, and this was diagnosed at home. Apart from those, there was no other major issues at all, and everything was covered under warranty. In terms of warranty, it's always advisable, if you plan to keep it long term, to have some sort of extended warranty, as the BMW i3 is unique in the BMW range and is built differently from any other BMW. So things can often get expensive. But generally speaking, this is a very reliable car, as are most EVs, it must be said, as there's very little to actually go wrong. And as a BMW i3 driver, as many other drivers, we've all been a bit disappointed that BMW haven't really continued improving or increasing the size of the battery dramatically, and it looks as if it's coming to an end as a model, which is a massive shame. If you like this review of the i3, then please give me a thumbs up, and if you really liked it, please subscribe. Bye for now.